It started out as a great day. I ran all the traffic lights on green on the way to work, and when I got there, miracle of miracles, there was an empty parking space right by the front door. An hour after I got to work, Natalie, my secretary, walked into my office and said Tom Snelling was on line 2. I picked up the phone, said good morning, and then listened as Tom told me that after thinking hard about it, he was going to sign a contract and work with us. It was a deal I had been working on for almost 2 months, and it was a contract worth over $6 million for my company. Tom said that the signed contract was faxed to me right as we were talking. I thanked him profusely, and after he hung up, I walked over to the fax machine, and sure enough, the contract was there. I took the contract and headed to Barry's office. Barry is my boss and the owner of the company, and asked his receptionist if she could see if Barry could spare a few minutes for me. She checked and he could, so I went into his office and told him I was here to brighten his day. I handed him the contract, and he looked at it and smiled. He told me that he never thought for a minute that I would get anywhere with Snelling. A few others had tried to do it, but it didn't work out for them. He smiled at me and told me that my bonus based on the deal would be obscene, then told me to get back to work. At 11, Stella, Barry's secretary, called me and told me that Barry needed to see me urgently. As I entered his office, I headed for a chair, but he told me not to bother sitting down as I wasn't going to be in his office long enough to get comfortable. He then told me that as of noon that day, I was the new VP of Sales, and that one of my first duties as VP of Sales was to board the flight to Dallas and ruffle the ruffled feathers of Mike Thomas, who was one of our biggest customers. He told me that Stella had all the details and sent me on my way. As I was picking up my things from Stella, she asked me if I wanted her to make travel arrangements for me, and I thanked her for the offer, but told her I could handle it myself. Back at my office, I tried to call my wife Terry to tell her the good news, but I was told she wasn't at work, so I left a message saying I'd call back later. I headed home to pack a bag, and when I returned, I saw Terry's car parked in the driveway. Strange, I thought, pulling up and parking behind her. As soon as I opened the door of the house, I realized what was going on. "Oh my God, yes! Darling, I love you!" It rang through the house. I walked to the bedroom door and saw my wife, who I have lived with for 15 years, having Randall Cunningham, who was her supervisor where she worked. They were so into it that they didn't even notice me standing in the doorway, and they were making so much noise that they didn't hear the clicks of my cell phone as I was taking pictures of them. I quickly went through the photos to make sure I had clear shots of the two of them, and then quietly walked out of the house. It took me 25 minutes to drive to Sampson & Sons, and when I got there, I asked if I could see Bart Sampson for a minute. We knew each other pretty well, and he came up to greet me and extended his hand to me as I entered his office. "It's good to see you, Rob, but if you're here to ask Terry to lunch, you've wasted your time because she's not here. I know exactly where she is, and I also know who she's with. I'd like to show you something." And I showed him the pictures from my phone. "When did you do this?" "About half an hour ago." "Where?" "At my house. They didn't even notice me when I took the pictures." "They're supposedly having lunch with one of our clients." He checked the file cabinet on his desk, read me a number, and asked, "Terry's cell phone number, right?" I nodded affirmatively, and he picked up his cell phone and called. We waited, and finally his call was answered. "Terry, your husband is here in my office, and he just showed me some very disgusting pictures of you and Randall that he took about a half hour ago. You both need to come back here and pick up any personal belongings you have here and stop by HR and get your last check. I want no trace of either of you left in this building by 5 o'clock this afternoon." A pause followed, and then, "No, Terry, we have nothing to talk about. Goodbye." He hung up and said, "I'm sorry, Rob, I had no idea. What are you going to do?" "Divorce her." "No, I meant as far as my company is concerned. Nothing. Even if you have rules that prohibit what they did, you'd have to know what they did to enforce them, and it's obvious to me that you had no more idea what they were doing than I did. We're doing fine. I'm just sorry I won't be seeing you at company picnics and parties anymore." I stood up. We shook hands, and I turned to leave. But before I got to the door, he said, "One thing before you go get a divorce." I turned to face him. I've never done business with your company because your wife worked here, and I've always been concerned about conflict of interest. I don't have Terry working for me anymore, so give me a call sometime next week, okay? I smiled at him and said, I will definitely call you, and left to find a store where I could buy everything I needed for my trip to Dallas.